and turn things over. So welcome everyone to Tazin Daniels.
Thanks so much, Maddie. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm out here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I imagine most of you, it's still morning. Give me just a moment and I'm going to pull up my slides here. Here we go. Maddie, can I get a nod if you can see that? Perfect. So thank you for that lovely introduction. I'll add to my intro that currently I'm an assistant director at the Center for Research on Learning and Teaching at the University of Michigan. As well as excited to be one of the inaugural experts in the expert network for the Every Learner Everywhere network. I have a background in medical anthropology, and part of my work at University of Michigan and broadly is that I work with faculty from all different disciplines. So I've done versions of this workshop for the medical school. I've done versions of this workshop for humanities, social sciences. So I'm really hoping that we can leverage our interdisciplinary perspectives and our different campus perspectives, because I know not everyone's at a similar university, but I think these are things that we can all pull together. I'll also mention that I'm on Twitter at The Pedagogist, and you can learn more about me and my background at thepedagogist.com. So if you are live tweeting this event, you're more than welcome to take screenshots or post quotes from your peers with permission, of course, and share anything you want on social media. I just ask that you tag me so I can see what you find valuable. So if that sounds good, I will move us right along. Okay, so just some expectations for chat. This is actually going to feel like a very quiet session from my end because we're not going to have any large group discussion. And in fact, I'm not going to require anyone to turn their camera on, partly because I want to model that we can have engagement without those two things. So hopefully that I'm able to model that properly, but the chat is going to be very lively. However, I'm not going to be monitoring it pretty much at all. So use it for yourselves to add ideas, to ask and answer questions, emphasis on the answer of each other's questions, because I know collectively we have a lot more knowledge than I ever could. And then, of course, to be respectful and recognize that not everybody has the same expectations and experiences as you do, and do your best to listen and try to understand a question for context before making any judgments, because we all have different expectations of engagement in different situations. And so if this was a longer workshop, I'd have full-blown community guidelines, but 40 minutes, this is, I think, going to be a good starting point for all of us. So instead of session goals, I want to start with my intentions for this session, because this is not a workshop as much as this is a salon. So I do want to share some of my knowledge and experiences, because I've been in the game for a while. I've been an educational developer, consultant, and coach for 15 years, and specifically helping instructors prepare for online teaching for over a decade. So I've got some expertise under the belt. I also do want to model some best practices for cultivating equitable engagement. To me, the best sessions are ones where you have all those meta moments like, Taz just did a thing, and I really like that. Can I use that in my classroom? Yes, you can, and you should. And you should modify and adapt it as needed. Create opportunities for experimentation and reflection. We are going to play with some tools today, some tools that I'm sure many of you have used before, some might be brand new. So treat this as an experiment. You're not going to break anything. And every time we play with something, I want you to start to contextualize, how could I use this in my own courses or my own learning experiences? And of course, reflecting. My big goal is to facilitate peer learning among participants. So I was able to attend a couple of salons, and most of them were in a kind of a large group, full group format. But we are going to be doing some teamwork today, because part of what I want to demonstrate and think about is how to do engagement both in large group settings as well as in small breakout groups or in teams. So I want you to invest in each other's learning and take responsibility for not just your learning, but also for people in your group and the larger group. And then finally, channeling my friend Karen Costa, acknowledging that we're all doing the best that we can, because we are still in the middle of a pandemic, despite what certain aspects of the news media and, politics and, communities might say. I recognize that many people might be multitasking or have care responsibilities or are tired, or as we talked about in the last session, grading and feeling, all kinds of feelings like that. I'm going to ask you to do your best, and I'm going to do my best to keep us engaged in this space, but there's only so much we can do. And I appreciate the effort and intention that you're putting in. All right. So I always like to start with a roadmap, even for a 45-minute session. There's 3 big chunks to this. So that way you'll know, like, oh, is it over yet? We still got one more part left. So giving you a sense of where we're at is something that I think is another practice that I'm modeling. So we're going to start by trying to build some quick community. We're going to discuss challenges and around articulating and managing expectations for engagement. And then we're going to share some solutions. And that's not just going to be me, that's going to be all of us collectively gathering and sharing solutions, so that by the end of this thing, we have a resource, a living resource that OLC has my permission to post wherever they'd like, because I think that this is really a representation of our collective knowledge. All right, number 1, community building. So let me see, how many folks do we have, Maddie, in our call today?
We have 34, including you and me.
Okay, great. So that means that we can get, probably 8 rooms, right, of 3 to 4. That would be great. So if you could start arranging that, I'm going to go ahead and describe what the activity is that we're going to do. So community building, I'm sure for this group, like, you're probably more open-minded to it. I've certainly presented this to faculty, and students are like, oh, community building. I don't want to build community. What does that even mean? It sounds cheesy. Icebreakers, right? Like, I am one of those people. But I have to say that there is science behind this, especially when it comes to engagement. So I threw up, I think, a very kind of like straightforward model for community building, which talks about both what is the kind of evolution of a team. And you can think of teams as like a breakout group. You can think of it as like a semester-long team. You can think of it as the entire course, and also the role of the facilitator, and recognizing that your role as the facilitator is going to change throughout that cycle. Where at first they're going to look towards you to be the leader, and eventually, right, because you should be intentionally forming your groups. That's a whole other workshop. But then also, being their guide as they're kind of going through what Tuckman calls the storming phase, right? Facing challenges and kind of like sorting through differences, and then getting into problem solving, and then finally like really being able to face whatever challenge they have in front of them. And by that point, the facilitator really becomes the consultant. And so opening pathways, being transparent about what your expectations are for each team, recognizing that there is a growth curve, I think are all really important things. But in order for this to happen, you have to get them to invest in each other. So we're going to do an activity in our breakout groups called Meaningful Objects. So this is a riff on, for those of you who know much about like intergroup relations or intergroup dialogue, there's a great activity called the culture box, where students will bring in a box with objects that represent some part of their identity. So we're going to do a very abbreviated version of that called Meaningful Objects. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is, in your space, if you're at home or in an office, find an object that represents some aspect of your identity, your life, something that says something about you, what you believe in, your values, what you care about. And I want you to share that with that group. If you are not at home, if you're in your car, or if you are in transit on a walk or something like that, or if you don't, if you're not able to turn your camera on, or if you don't want to turn your camera on, describe what that object would be. I'll give you an example. So behind me is this beautiful, and you can't tell because of perspective, humongous painting that my husband made for me, which is a picture of my mother. It's based on a photograph taken many, many decades ago, well before I was born, when she was in college, and she was a traditional Bengali dancer. And so he digitized that photo and painted it into this beautiful background piece. And for those of you who know much about Bangladesh, the flag is actually a green background with a red sun in the middle. And so for me, it's important for me to express both my American side as well as my Bengali side as soon as I meet someone online. So there's my quick 45-second example of sharing an object. Maddie, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and put us into groups. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this. So these are lightning rounds. Build community quick, because we're going to come back together and move into the next piece. And I will have Maddie send you a 1-minute warning.
Yep, and those rooms were open, so you should have gotten the invitation. So Taz, one of the other things we can do too is if you want to use the folks in the large room for other discussion or have discussion internally amongst ourselves, please let me know. I can also pause the recording as well.
I think pausing the recording makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
All right, folks. So if you're watching this recording, I'm going to go ahead and pause that for a moment. All right, 17 more seconds. Three, two, and one.
All right, welcome back. So what I would love is for in the chat, and I'm going to do this after each of our activities, is for you to just offer some thoughts on how that went, what worked well, and could you adopt an icebreaker like this that centers student identity, that is kind of a low stakes way of getting people to kind of get to know each other and invest in each other's learning. Is this something that you could adopt to fit in your learning space? I'm not going to linger on the slide, but I just want to put the prompts up. So please feel free to add your thoughts to the chat. So we're actually going to jump right into part 2 because, you know, we got to stay on time here, which is to discuss challenges. Because I know that if this was Cinchi, we wouldn't have to be in the salon, right? So there are things that I know are on top of people's minds. And so what I want to continue to do is demonstrate, again, some different types of activities, some different types of technologies we could use to answer these questions. So the first one that we're going to play with is polling. I imagine that many of you have either participated in a poll on Zoom, Poll Everywhere, Mentimeter. There's so many different applications out there. So we're going to do one in a moment, but I wanted to just step back and talk about the tool and the ways that I think you can leverage it for equitable engagement in online spaces. So using polling as a quick way to hear everyone's thoughts anonymously. So thinking about the kinds of things that would be helpful to be anonymous, right? If you're asking a sensitive question about opinions, if you're asking for knowledge comprehension, like, do you understand this thing? It feels very high stakes to say in the chat, like, yes, professor, like, I don't understand this thing, whereas a poll might be a quick way to do it. It is a quick way to check for comprehension, right? Doing a quick multiple choice quiz. Do you understand this concept? Do I need to move on? What are questions that are at the top of your mind? Using something like a word cloud, which we'll do, is also a quick way for the facilitator to start to see patterns and responses. Sometimes it's hard to like read through all of the responses. So you can do a quick linguistic analysis to see what the big patterns are. And I will mention the tool I'm going to use today is called Poll Everywhere, which does offer a free educator account that includes up to 45 respondents. So thank you, Poll Everywhere. I do have a nonprofit account or a small business account, and that's about $100 a year. So to me, that gives me up to 700 responses when I do those big workshops for different universities that make it worth my while. So y'all ready to try one? Okay. So the question is, what do you feel is the biggest barrier to engagement in your online classes? The way you can respond to this is either by opening up a new browser window, going to pollev.com and then entering my code. Maddie, would you mind putting this in the chat? It's all capital T Daniels 100 and then respond to the question. You can also do this by text. It's pretty cool by texting T Daniels 100 and in the message writing 37607, and then it will prompt you to text your message right from your phone. So I'm going to give it just a few minutes, and as soon as I see some things pop up, I think we'll be ready to go. And actually, I said that backwards. You're going to text 37607 and in the message, write T Daniels 100. I always switch that. They word it so funny. going to read some of these out loud. Time management, preconceived notions that they won't do as well online, so that somewhat withdrawn from the get-go. Time, desire to keep things as asynchronous as possible. Ideas, grappling with Google Slides and maintaining eye contact at the same time. Well, yeah, cognitive overload. Student interest, student multitasking. I'll add instructor multitasking. Building in enough time to understand learners' prior knowledge, pre-assessments. Yep. Participants who don't know how to click on links in the chat, find chat or open a browser and don't know how to get back. Yep. Building community, multitasking. During COVID, especially, instructors indicate that overall wariness is the biggest barrier. Yeah, we're all tired. Fear of failure or saying the wrong thing. Cameras off. Lack of time management and planning so that they're rushing through the work rather than taking the time to fully review and participate. Keeping attention, keeping them available and engaged, motivating them when they're non-majors, encouraging meaningful participation, creating a sense of shared space and shared purpose, confidence, student motivation and schedules. Everyone is so busy and tired. Yep. Awkwardness of the virtual setting. Access to adequate devices and stable internet, absolutely. Lack of tech skills. Fear of peer judgment, yep. Fear of failure, absolutely. What's interesting to me as I look at these is in my brain, I'm trying to parse out, and feel free to keep reading as I'm talking. I feel like I'm trying to parse out which of these things are barriers to engagement in general that we experience in face-to-face versus what are the kinds of things that are specific to the online environment. And I think that there is a very squishy line there. There are some things that are very particular to this move to remote teaching, not just virtual teaching. And I think these are important to keep in line. So what I'm going to ask us to do is actually do one more of these. Now that you've got some practice, that's also important with technology, give them a chance to practice, is we are going to do one more. And I'm going to flip the script. What are some advantages to engaging online versus face-to-face? So think about, right, what are those opportunities you have in your online teaching that you might not have otherwise, especially for those of you who are in this for the first time, or especially those who are experts and have thought about this, who know the research. And this is going to be a word cloud. So I ask that you kind of like try to sum up your thoughts in just a couple of key words, and then we will take a look at where our cloud is going. And for those of you who are already connected, I don't think you need to text again. You've already joined, so you can go ahead and just write your response to this question. I love it. So for those of you who are new to word clouds, you'll notice that as people submit their responses, Poll Everywhere will beautifully make this collage of words. And the size of the words do matter. It represents how often something is being contributed. And so that is kind of what gives us a sense of, right, what are the main themes and ideas. So right now I'm already saying that students is the biggest word, which is great, because what do we talk about? Student-centered learning. So quite literally, our word cloud has centered students for us. I also see flexibility here. I see equity. I see time. I say meow. I don't know why, but I'm about it. We can talk about that in the chat if you're one of the at least 4 people that put that in there. I see ownership, pace, reflection, time, accessibility, engagement, deliberative, wiggle room. I think maybe that's what it is. Fidgeting. Oh, I want to hear more about that. Self-paced, familiar, experience. I love this. So if we had more time, I would ask each of you to give me an interpretation, right? Once this thing crystallizes of like, what are the main things that are coming out of it? And so this can actually be a great jumping board for discussion. but we don't have time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to our next activity, or not activity, but our next section, which is starting to realize how do we leverage the online space to come up with some solutions. We know what the challenges are. We know what the advantages are of being online. How do we bring those things together to solve these issues? All right. Oh, there we go. So again, just like every other activity in the chat, offer your thoughts on this activity, what worked well, and how you might adopt using polling in your classes. Or if you've used it before, give us some good ideas of how you've done that. So while you're doing that, I'm going to move into our third piece, our third and final piece, which is all about sharing solutions. So I feel like it's important to have some principles rather than just strategies, because to me, being an equitable, inclusive teacher means building an equity-based mindset. Okay, because I cannot solve every situation for you in this call, neither can you. You don't need to have hard and fast rules. What is helpful to have is some guiding principles for how you want to move forward with making decisions about engagement in your class. And frankly, decisions about anything, your curriculum, assessments, community with students, all of the above. Transparency. Communicate your expectations around engagement and participation and explain why they are your expectations. If you require cameras to be on, which I know some units do, and across my campus at least, you need to be crystal clear why. If you expect students to participate in the chat 11 times, and that's what counts as participation, you need to tell them you have to participate 11 times in order for this to count. So transparency, it feels obvious once we say it out loud, but I want to emphasize that this is so much more important in online than it would be in face-to-face, because you have to continue to remind them of your expectations. Empathy. Ask learners what challenges they might have in meeting your expectations and adjust accordingly. For example, somebody might not have access to a camera, or their camera is broken and they can't afford a new laptop, or they have care responsibilities and they're breastfeeding during class, and so they don't want to have their cameras on. Creating an environment where students can share what their limitations are and how they might not be able to meet your expectations is a very humbling experience, and one that's very important for instructors to embrace so that you can adjust accordingly, because don't assume you know what the needs of your students are. You must ask them. Number 3, flexibility. Offer multiple pathways for engagement and participation. I think this takes some experimentation, and it doesn't mean offer 100 different ways, but offering a couple of different opportunities for students to get those participation points, for you to be able to check in on their engagement and realize that this is as much for them as it is for you. Number 4, accountability. Periodically ask learners to assess the engagement level and solicit ideas for improvement. It's very easy at the beginning, right? We hear this all the time. Yeah, everyone has their cameras on, the chat is lively and people are posting. And then by like week 4 or 5, like it's dwindled. So don't do the work of scolding them. Ask them to assess themselves. If this was the commitment that we made, here's where we're at. What's going on, right? Like, what are some ways that we can support each other and encourage each other? Building that learning community. I think, again, it goes back to that stage 1. Building that community is essential. You treat them like adults, right? You have them help solve the problems that they, are a part of. And I think moving into that facilitation role, as opposed to being punitive or, taking it personally, this will give you a lot of data about what's going on and what your role is to fix that. And then finally, feedback. Give them feedback on how they're doing in terms of participation. Doing that reach out before it's too late, right? Before grades are due, can reveal so much about what students are experiencing and going through. Perhaps a student is on a team and they have been microaggressed all semester. How would they, and they've decided to not show up anymore. How would you know that unless you're doing midterm evaluations of student teams, unless you're setting up office hours, unless you're creating pathways for communication and giving them feedback also so they have a chance to, address that, make up for it, come back, right? And I think that's a key piece of this as well. So here are some basic principles for inclusive engagement. What I would love to do now is, with these in mind, I want to move into our final technology that we're going to play with in the last 12 minutes or so, which is whiteboards. Now, Google is something that's freely available to everyone. I know different universities have different rules around, right, like privacy and FERPA and rules, all that stuff. But whiteboards in general are something that I definitely encourage you to play with. So I'm going to be using Google Jamboards. So this might, again, be a technology some of you have used before. But I want to talk about some of the advantages of this tool. It's a great way to structure activities and keep teams on track. We've heard this before. Don't just send people off into breakout rooms. Give them a task, give them a challenge, make it into a competition, which is what we're going to do next. Now that you build community, now you feel like you're a team. You can compete against the other teams for the greater good of the group. It has really cool features more than a Google Doc. Things like if you have an iPad, you can use your stylus to draw and write freehand just like you would in a real whiteboard. In your offices, member classrooms. So here's a good virtual sit-in. And also uploading images from Google. You can also upload GIFs, which are really fun. I like to do an activity where it's like, what animal are you feeling like today? And people will put GIFs of animals. And it's just, there's just lots of fun dynamic things that you can do with that. And what we're going to do with it today is using it as a gallery walk for learners to browse and add to. As a kind of a collective living resource that we are going to create in our last 10 minutes together. So in just a moment, I'm going to share a link to our OLC Ideate session by Dr. Daniels Jamboard. And so in your groups, you are each going to, and you can see the top, can you see my mouse if I do this right here, this top bar where if you click on the little down caret, you'll be able to see all the different rooms that I have pre-structured for you. And each room has a different engagement goal that they are going to be working on. So for example, room 5 is checking for comprehension. If you go down to the sticky note tool, that's what I'd recommend to capture tools, strategies, resources, best practices to meet that goal for engagement in online classes. You can put links to different tools. You can download images of the tool that you use, whatever you want to do. And you're going to get, let's see, about 8 minutes. And I want to see you filled. Yeah, Maddie, don't choke on your coffee. I know it's very little time. It's a competition. I want to see which group can get the most number of stickies up there. And once we give you the warning, we will ask you to pause and then start clicking through and looking at the rest of the group and adding ideas. And this Jamboard will be open for the rest of the week so that people can come back and visit it. So with that, Maddie, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and opening up the rooms again, and we'll send you out there. Oh, actually, before you do that, I have to give you the thing, meaning the link to the board. See, this is technology rule number 100 is make sure you put the link in the chat. All right, there is a link to the Jamboard. Everyone should have anonymous access to that. So feel free to jump back in the main room if you're having any issue accessing it. But otherwise, I will see you in the Jamboard and then back in here in just about 8 minutes or so.
All right, those rooms are open. All right, would you like me to pause the recording again?
Great, thank you, Maddie. All right, welcome back, everyone. So instead of apologizing for some miscommunication between Maddie and I in terms of how many breakout groups we needed and the boards, I'm going to give you all a compliment because I, in real time, was witnessing some real problem solving among each of the rooms. We're just going to start filling this one out because guess what? At the end of the day, you knew this was an ungraded assignment. You knew the goal was to get as many good ideas as possible. So frankly, I didn't care which room you're in. But also it's a good lesson to realize that when you have one person facilitating and someone else making the breakout rooms, that kind of coordination is going to take some more time. And so I hopefully can model what that looks like to take some grace and let an activity go. Because there was certainly a moment for me stepping back where I was like, oh, should I hop into this room and apologize for having 2 room number 6s? And then I thought, no, I'm not sorry because they're still getting what they need out of it. And so if anything, I turn that into giving you all a compliment, which you definitely deserve. So I'm going to ask you in the chat once again to share what you got out of doing that activity, what worked well, and how might you adopt it to fit your class, and also perhaps some lessons that you learned about what didn't work well and how you might do it differently, or how you think I might do it differently the next time I do it. And then I think what I want to do for a final closer is to do one more poll, which is just a simple takeaway. I'm not going to ask you to fill out a whole evaluation, but I just want to know, what did you find valuable about today's salon? And so that can be a tip, a trick, a technology. It can be a person. It can be a philosophy or principle, a quotable, something that we can put into this space just to kind of generate for ourselves and each other. What are those main takeaways that we have? So I'm going to invite you all to do that. Maddie, can we take that 1 minute to do this activity? Perfect. Active learning, yeah. Polls can be engaging and fun. Yes, to experiment. You're not gonna break it. Tell your students it's an experiment. That way they're not the rats, they're your co-scientists, right? That's the trick to experimentation. Let them know. Trying out the Jamboard. Yeah, new strategies, networking, beautiful. All the ways to engage. Space for voices. Yep, everything, beautiful. Modeling of active learning techniques and meta-analysis. Resources. Infusing engagement with gamification. Yeah, hopefully that competition was not stressful. I obviously did not name a winner. Nobody left feeling less than, I hope, but it's a good way to focus on quantity over quality, because that's what I wanted. Ideas, community, trying Jamboard, various ways to engage in even a short amount of time. And it was fun. I would love for you to continue to fill this out if you haven't. I'm going to move into our final slide, which is just, and of course, it's always the thing with when you have one of these polls, sometimes it's hard to get out of it, is my Twitter, which is @thepedagogist. Maddie, would you mind putting that in the chat? I know it's a great word. I was very proud of myself when I snagged it on Twitter. It's a made up word, but it signals to what it is that I'm trying to express. But it's hard to spell. So if you could put the spelling in the chat, that's the quickest way to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter all day, every day. And if you're not on Twitter, you can find me on LinkedIn and also my website, tazindaniels.com or thepedagogist.com. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that I can see all of your lovely frames, to just express my gratitude for spending your 45 minutes with me this morning. I thank you. Your learners thank you. All the people your learners will impact, thank you as well. So with that, I'm going to do something that I always ask people to do, is go ahead and unmute yourself and just say loudly, thank you to the whole room and farewell. And then Maddie, I'll turn it over to you. So go ahead, unmute yourself. I want to hear everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fabulous. Thanks for having fun.
Hey,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you
you
so much. Thank you all.
This was great.
See, now I don't feel like I was by myself. And that whole time I didn't hear a single voice except for Maddie. And I would say I felt pretty engaged. So Maddie, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Again, this is awesome. I know, at least for me, one of the things that as I pull up these, our closing slide and pull up our transition slides, that I think is really a big takeaway, at least for me, is that throughout the week so far, if you've been along with us, you will have heard this right alongside, is that there have been some sessions where we've had some amazing conversation around what we need to do. And we navigated you through, okay, well, let's get inspired. What are some frameworks that can inspire us? And what are some approaches that can inspire us? And today the goal was to move into, and I'm so grateful for our salon leader, Tazin Daniels, this morning, because our explicit call to all of them today was to let's look at some concrete actions. How can we actually do this? And I'm so glad that we did exactly this in this morning session, is that I think some fantastic models. And if you're in that collaborative notes doc, I know Angela has already drawn attention to some of the really specific moves that Taz did for us this morning, that and she had that call. If you hopped in a little bit late, one of the things she said at the very beginning was, please take the ideas here, take the strategies, take learn from the modeling that she did with us this morning into your own spaces. So thank you for that, Taz, because already I'm excited. I'm like, yes, I need to do this and this and all of our spaces. And I hope you're all leaving with that as well. So thank you. And thank you to you all. So we have at this point a transition break. So if you have been along with us along the way, you know this is coming.